and welcome to today's webinar entitled Encryption, Securing Your Digital Assets. This morning's presentation will be given by Seth Earle. Seth is a senior LAN engineer with expertise in cloud infrastructure protection. He focuses on implementing robust encryption protocols for Office 365 environments, securing cloud-based assets, and managing encrypted backups for both cloud and on-premise resources. Seth, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So today's webinar is going to be a bit scattered compared to some of the previous ones. Encryption is kind of just a broad term that covers a lot of different aspects of the IT field, but really each topic isn't big enough to base the entire webinar on unless you're doing like a school system really getting deep into the encryption. So I combined a couple of the big things that we see and work on in just this one webinar section. Encryption, it's a necessary tool for securing the data in the enterprise. It gets used a lot, but I've seen the technical data, the technical side of it is something a lot of people don't understand. And so it causes a lot of people to ignore it or kind of misconfigure it. So what I want to go over today is kind of just a couple pieces of encryption. I want to do a quick overview of how encryption works. So, you know, what symmetrical encryption is versus asymmetric, how like the different, you know, what a key is, what a certificate actually is, things like that. Then I want to go over like what encryption at rest is, encryption in motion, and then lastly, for some of our CMMC customers, just explain what FIPS mode encryption is or FIPS validated encryption for some of the different systems that are out there. And then after all said and done, I do want to kind of go over something I thought about this morning, which isn't part of the presentation, but SSL certificates. This is something I see a lot of people not really knowing. And so a lot of people are more or less afraid to set up things like encrypted SMB, HTTPS properly. And so I do want to kind of give an overview of what those are, but that'll be at the end for some of the more technical people to be on. And I'll let you know once the normal presentation is over for those who don't really have a technical background to look into. So to start, I just want to give a quick overview of what is encryption. In short, encryption is black magic. There's a lot of math under the hood with it. Master's programs have entire courses dedicated to this. This is something that like you learn more as a comp sci major than as an IT person. And luckily, we don't really need to know that. What we do need to know is more or less the higher level of how encryption works. A quick and easy way of explaining encryption is that when you have data, you can apply an encryption key to it, at which point it will become gibberish to anyone who doesn't have that key to then decrypt it. The encryption is done using a bunch of math algorithms. You may have heard of like AES 256 encryption for BitLocker. That is a mathematical algorithm where you feed a seed to it, a string of gibberish. You put that into the algorithm, put the algorithm against your file that you want to encrypt, at which point it scrambles it in such a way that it is unscrambleable unless you have that initial key that you put into the algorithm. And so, that's what we see out there. There's a lot of algorithms out there. Every year, new ones kind of show up, new versions of old algorithms show up. But luckily, we don't really need to know that. A lot of that's chosen by, the government approves them, or NIST, Microsoft, Mac, Veeam. They all choose the correct algorithms for what they're doing. So we don't really need to know what what the algorithms are, just more or less that they exist. They take a key in and kind of what that key is. In some cases, encryption is done with like the same key. So you as an admin, you create a password, effectively a password for your encryption, feed it into the AES, it scrambles it. And then if you want to descramble it, you put that password in again and it decrypts it. That's kind of how this, that's what this picture here on the slide's doing. You have the exact same encryption key and decryption key to open it up. This is called symmetric encryption. In the enterprise, a big example of this is something like BitLocker. BitLocker works through a password used to unlock the hard drive or a password stored in the TPM of the computer to unlock the hard drive. In other instances, there's cases where the encryption key that you use to encrypt the data actually can't unencrypt the data. You have to use a second key to then unencrypt it. This is called asymmetric encryption. This is something that you see with like SSL, TLS, your website kind of work. There's one certificate or one key that you go through, encrypt the data. When you send the data over, the person unencrypting it has a private secondary key that only they know to then unencrypt the data. And that's kind of what you see a lot there. Luckily, this concept isn't something you really need to know, symmetric versus asymmetric, but it is out there. The two choices are used constantly, and they do kind of cause some issues popping up if you don't know exactly what people are using when you're trying to do some of the advanced troubleshooting. So I did just kind of want to go over to that as kind of a basis of the encryption side before really getting into the different actual enterprise uses of encryption that you see in the day-to-day. So with encryption, there's the asymmetric and symmetric encryption. There's also two types of like encryption thought processes that you'll see a lot in documentation, compliance regulations, things like that. And that is your encryption at rest and your encryption in transit. Encryption at rest is for things like your file server or a laptop. This is data that is just sitting on the hard drive and waiting to be accessed. Even as you're reading on the hard drive, it's still considered at rest because it's not leaving the hard drive. It's sitting on the same piece of storage the whole time. Encryption in transit is for when files are moving through the network. This is where email encryption, your SSL, TLS encryption comes in. This is honestly some of the more important encryption to take care of because encryption at rest, you have to steal a laptop, you have to steal a server to get a hold of that. Encryption in transit, anybody listening in on your traffic can get that. It just takes one janitor walking by with a man in the middle device, to listen to everything on your network if it's not encrypted. Ken does that all the time. Whereas if it is encrypted, well, people can't hear that, and most of your data transfers are going to be encrypted. You pull a file from a file server to your computer, then data has to be encrypted in transit, otherwise somebody hears it. Your phone calls, Teams meetings, any kind of emails with PII, PHI, those are the most susceptible pieces of information, and those are the pieces that really need to be encrypted the most. The encryption at rest is important. BitLockering your hard drives, making sure if somebody does have bad access to your network, they can't steal it, or if they do steal that laptop, the data is encrypted. But the transit part is really the more important aspect for keeping your network secure. But moving into the encryption at rest side, the first encryption at rest example I had is BitLocker. This is, again, for your file servers, your laptops, keeping track of making sure the data is encrypted when it's just sitting around when people are actually using it on their local machines. BitLocker is a free software built into all of your Windows Pro and higher subscriptions. Mac does have a comparable version called File Vault, and Linux has it's another File Vault system, FileCrypt, sorry. So FileCrypt is the Linux version of that. But BitLocker is one that you're going to see as an admin more often than not. Any machine running Windows 10 or 11 or Server 2016 and newer does come with this software. BitLocker will encrypt any type of physical drive on a machine, so a boot drive, a data drive, your D secondary hard drive, or even removable storage like a flash drive, an SD card, anything like that. So you've got all of your data there being encrypted, and then you as an administrator get to choose just how much of that data is to be encrypted. When this is something that comes up during like deployments of encryption to existing environments, how much of the data do I encrypt? BitLocker has the option to encrypt the entire hard drive. So if you have a 1 terabyte hard drive, it will encrypt the entire terabyte. This takes a while when you go to do your initial encryption. So if you're deploying BitLocker in your environment, people's hard drives will be spinning up. They'll be a bit slower while the BitLocker is running initially, but then the hard drive's fully encrypted. Any new data they write is written encrypted, and it's a lot faster moving forward. The other option you have is you can partially encrypt it. It's called encrypt used hard drive space. This way, if somebody has only 100 gigs on their terabyte hard drive, it's only encrypting the 100 gigs. It's quicker on the first time that you encrypt it, but every file that they put down BitLocker then has to expand itself to encrypt those the extra data there afterwards. I recommend full disk encryption from the start, just because it's one and done. New laptops, people won't really see the issue, and then you don't have to worry about the day-to-day slowdowns with it. So if you go to deploy BitLocker, that is just a recommendation, just a heads up with it. With BitLocker, the way it works is BitLocker encrypts your hard drives. It will run through, encrypt everything, and then every time the machine turns on, the hard drive has to be decrypted. Obviously, this way data can be accessed by Windows. If it gets stolen, people can't get into it because the hard drive's encrypted. There's a few ways to decrypt these drives that have been locked. For laptops and desktops, you can use a hardware chip that's on the laptops called the TPM. You can use a startup pin. So when the laptop turns on or the desktop turns on, it comes with a big window where BitLocker has you put a password into the machine. You can put a decryption key to a flash drive. So you have to plug the flash drive into the machine to then be able to unlock the drive. Or you can do a combination of all three of them. If you use just the TPM, it really ensures that the drive is encrypted, which will meet a lot of your compliance requirements, CMC, HIPAA, things like that. User turns on the laptop, it just boots. The TPM presents the decryption key, Windows accepts it, decrypts the drive. The users aren't aware of anything. This isn't a problem if a laptop gets stolen, because theoretically, you as an admin have implemented MFA to all of your devices. So when somebody steals a laptop, the drive decrypts itself on boot. They get to the Windows login page, but now they can't log into Windows because they don't have MFA. The benefit for this one is if they steal the hard drive or steal the laptop, pull out the hard drive and try plugging into another machine, now they can't see the data on that hard drive because it's encrypted. And that's kind of the security side of it. So even though it's just a TPM encryption, the drive itself is encrypted. If you don't use MFA, though, this is kind of a bad route, because if the laptop's stolen, they still have access to all of your data because they can just break into the laptop. If you don't have MFA for Windows, it's then recommended to use a computer TPM and the startup pin to decrypt BitLocker. This way, if the laptop's stolen, they need the laptop itself and a secondary password to decrypt the hard drive to then boot into it. This is a good method for securing laptops. It's one that is recommended across the board that I've seen is the startup pin and computer TPM, or if you don't have MFA, because it does secure the data from theft and stuff like that. Docs actually used to go this route up until about a year ago. We had the startup pin and TPM requirements, but it caused issues with things such as Windows reboot patching and various issues where if a machine reboots and nobody's there, the machine would never actually fully boot because it would be sitting on the BitLocker pin page. So we made sure that MFA was deployed everywhere, removed the startup pin, and went to entirely TPM unlock for our machines. This way, something reboots without anybody there, we don't really notice. It comes back and it's sitting on the login page ready to go. Again, if our laptops get stolen, we don't worry about it, because even if the user can, or even if the thief can turn on the laptop, they can't get in. They need multi-factor to log in unless they're doing one of the giant the state level exploits that are out there to bypass TPM. But your average everyday thief isn't going to be able to do that kind of stuff. And so the ease of use was just worth it's worth the additional risk since we mitigated the real risk with the MFA side. For your servers side of things, BitLocker has a couple different ways to unlock. Really, we recommend just using a TPM for the servers to unlock stuff. TPMs they're available on physical servers. So if you have a tower server or a rack server that's running just straight Windows, it has a TPM on it to unlock the VM for you. This is nice, again, if you have like a DC at a remote site where you're just running it on hardware, that's good. But for virtual servers, there's a big issue there. We recommend using like a vTPM. ESXi 7 supports it now, Hyper-V supports it, where you can create a virtualized TPM module, attach it to your VM, and then the VM sees that TPM to then unlock the machine automatically for you, again, allowing you to patch without issues or do any kind of reboots that have to happen. This is great as well because if somebody breaks into your environment and manages to steal the VMDK or the VHDX files, they're encrypted. People can't get away with the data because they can't get into those VMs due to them being encrypted. If you don't have a system that supports a virtual TPM or the licensing issues or something, they do sell self-encrypting hard drives for like your SAN or your local storage on the server. These are more expensive than a normal drive. You have to buy them specifically from HP or Dell or whoever your SAN vendor is to get these kind of self-encrypting drives. They're great for physical theft. Again, the drives are encrypted. The requirements for your compliance. But if somebody breaks in, say through your VPN, hijacks a computer, and they can gain remote access to your hypervisor, they can steal your VM files, and the VM files themselves aren't encrypted, which then can constitute an incident with your insurance companies. With all these things, with like the TPMs, the VTPMs, stolen laptops, there always comes the issue of a broken laptop. With broken laptop, a broken server, having to restore the server to a new VM, there comes the issue of restoring these. If this incident ever comes up and you're locked out of the BitLocker or a BitLocked machine due to the need of the TPM or decryption keys, the systems do have a backdoor to get into them using a recovery code that you can then use to unlock the drive. These recovery codes aren't created by default with like group policy deployed methods. But if you've ever manually BitLocked a machine, it does require you to make those recovery codes. In an enterprise environment, there's actually ways to automatically take those recovery codes and back them up to a offsite or a secondary environment. Most commonly, places will have the codes backed up to like Active Directory, maybe Entra ID if you're a cloud environment. This way, if something happens, a motherboard dies, gets replaced, you get locked out. Server dies, or you have to move it to a new cluster that doesn't have the same TPM certificates, you can still get into the drives with these recovery keys. And then once you get into the drive with the recovery key, BitLocker is actually smart enough to then re-register itself to the new TPM available, and you can continue on your way. If you don't have these methods, you are kind of locked out forever. BitLocker is, at least to my knowledge, at this point, it's uncracked to get into. So we do recommend centrally managing your BitLocker when you utilize it. We've got 3 different ways of managing the BitLocker encryption, the recovery codes. Most common ways I see are these 3 here: Active Directory, Entra ID with Intune, or through antivirus software. each of these methods do have like benefits. They have issues with them. We see all sorts of routes being taken with them, and I don't have a 100% recommended method. All three of these are good methods. The first option, Active Directory, is nice. It's included in your Active Directory suite. You don't have to pay any extra licensing. You just install a role through Windows Server Manager, and you have it. You then utilize a group policy to push out your BitLocker settings, tell your machines to automatically encrypt themselves, and to send their recovery keys back to the Active Directory server. Then, if you ever need to get access, you just open the BitLocker recovery console, search for the affected computer, and bam, you have a code to type into the computer. This does have the downside of computers and servers needing a line of sight domain controllers to be able to encrypt themselves and then send off the recovery codes. So if you're trying to do like a BitLocker deployment to remote users, people who work from home, people who never go into the office because they're salespeople or whatever, they have to have the VPN up and running for however long it takes for the drive to BitLocker itself or receive the group policy, so that Windows send it off to the Windows server and encrypt itself. And then anytime BitLocker tries to rotate its recovery code, which it does this every month or 2 months at this point, it has to have VPN access before it can reset that recovery code. So it's a little bit annoying for the end users who are remote to be able to have that. It does cause potentially longer lasting recovery codes than are recommended. The other issue is, it can require it takes an administrator to log into the domain controllers, pull that recovery code, and grab the recovery code to then walk the user through it. The second option is one that Microsoft's been recommending more and more. This is using Entra ID and Intune to manage the BitLocker. So Entra ID, this is supported with the free version of Entra ID, but you then need Intune to actually manage the BitLocker component. Use Intune to tell all of your laptops and desktops to configure the BitLocker and then store the data up in either Active Directory, so Intune machines can push the keys to Active Directory, or you tell them to push up into Entra ID. Entra ID is nice because the target machine, the affected BitLocked machine, it can be anywhere. With more and more remote workers, it's becoming more and more convenient to have things that are cloud only like this, and BitLocking through Intune just requires an internet connection. It doesn't require a VPN or anything like that. The downside of using the Intune method is you do have to have the Intune licensing to do so. This isn't the actual process to encrypt the drives isn't included in the default like Microsoft subscriptions. It's just the only thing that's really free about it is that Entra can be used to store the BitLocker keys with a Entra free license. You don't need an Entra Premium or anything to store them, but you do need the Intune license to actually perform the operation. With this though, I usually recommend Office 365 license that has Intune included anyways, just because we are moving more and more to it. So with a lot of people who I've helped migrate to the cloud, that's not really a hurdle that's necessary. But for some of our legacy customers, or maybe people using E3 or Exchange Online only licensing, that is an extra cost that then has to come up and be looked into. The last option that we have is using our antivirus to manage BitLocker. There's a lot of antivirus solutions out there. A lot of them do have an encryption module that can be used to manage BitLocker. Sophos is one that I know that supports it, because that is actually how Docs manages its BitLocker codes. You can configure the antivirus policy to encrypt the drive, send the keys up to the cloud, and then you're done. The nice part about this is that, again, could happen anywhere in the world. Users don't have to be on premise. They don't have to have a VPN connection. They can be anywhere. You can push the BitLocker settings, and then it's done for. It's all, the licensing may already be included. A lot of antivirus licenses, if you get something that's a little bit higher than the base tier for like the reporting requirements and stuff, that usually does come with the encryption module already included, or that encryption module may be cheaper than getting the Intune license or something like that as well. So it may be something to look into. Regardless of which route you take, though, there is an issue with changing your management method. Bit locking machines is kind of a one and done process. Once a machine has been bit locked and it has its process to like send the keys places, you can't change that without decrypting the drive and then decrypting it and then re-encrypting it with those new settings. There isn't an automated method I'm aware of to do this, and so that does pose an issue of oh, we're going to do antivirus and then we want to move to Intune, or we're doing Active Directory, we want to move to Intune. There isn't really a nice, pretty way of moving where like the recovery codes go. If you want to change, like your TPM unlock or your startup pin unlock, that is easily done. But things like encryption strengths or recovery code backups can't be done easily and have to be kind of planned for to push the decryption. Outside of BitLocker, one thing we do see a lot of people have questions about is like flash drive encryption. When your data has to leave the Windows machines, you need to encrypt that flash drive if it's containing some kind of sensitive information. If you're transferring it between two Windows machines, there is a BitLocker solution. It's called BitLocker to go, where you use a password, encrypt the drives, and it's just as encrypted as a normal BitLocker drive. Again, this is nice if you're going Windows to Windows. Just plug the drive in, tell them what the password is, and they can put on the drive and go from there. But there's sometimes situations where you're under transfer to a non-Windows device. This is times where, I've seen it with people. They may have IoT devices that they're programming, or they're moved to a Linux box that's running whatever actual hardware they're working on. And in those cases, you can't use BitLocker because there just isn't the decryption method. So with that, there's physically encrypted flash drives. These drives actually have an encryption module built into them. Generally, they have, it looks like this drive, this DataSure drive, which is what Docs uses for our encrypted drives. It has a pin on it. You plug the drive in, you put the pin in, it unlocks the drive, at which point the drive is decrypted. It shows up on the computer as just a normal flash drive. Data can be moved on and off of it, and then as soon as you unplug the drive, it's encrypted again. This is nice because not all environments are all Windows. Sometimes you do have to move this data, and this is what we've recommended. We've had a couple people say that they prefer this, when they're doing their prototyping and stuff, instead of having to try to find weird workarounds to it. This isn't something for everybody, but I do want people to just be aware that these do exist for when you're having to send sensitive data through methods that you can't ensure the encryption works. This could also be useful if you're sending data between physical locations or something where you can't do an encrypted data transfer, you can't do the BitLocker, maybe between companies. You can use these to store the data if you have to sneaker net something. After the encryption at rest side of things, there's, like I said, the encryption in transit. This mainly works, again, stop people from listening and stop people like a pen test or some kind of physical hacker from dropping a man-in-the-middle device, listening to all your traffic, stop, North Korea or the CIA from listening on any data that's actually transferring over the internet from you, what have you, for who's listening in. The one that a lot of environments need is the email encryption. Email encryption works by encrypting the email somehow and then sending it off to the next person. There's two real methods with the email encryption that I'm seeing. One is a server-side encryption, and the other one is client-side encryption. For server-side encryption, this includes products like the Office 365 message encryption, or OME, if you've seen that. The way this works is the Exchange Online server, when you send an email that's set to be encrypted, when the server receives the email, it holds that email in the Office 365 server. That server is encrypted at rest. It uses SSL TLS to encrypt any network traffic. That email stays there. Office will then send out a second email to the recipient telling them, hey, you have encrypted email, click here to access it. The user then logs into Office 365 and views the email on the Exchange Online server. This works if they're using if the recipient's an on-premise Exchange, Gmail, Yahoo, even another Office 365 environment. That email never leaves Office 365, and so it's encrypted that whole way. If they want to forward that email, it actually just stays on the Office 365 server, and a second email is sent out to whoever they're forwarding it to, telling them, hey, come look at this email on Office 365. So that's kind of the method. That's what Docs uses for encryption. It's built into Office. If you have like a business premium license or the base Office E3 license, it's included. Very common feature there. If you don't have Exchange Online or you're using like a G Suite or something, spam filters may actually have a server-side encryption for you. So I know we used to use Zixmail, Barracuda spam filters have this on certain encryption or certain license levels, where it functions the exact same way. You send an email, the server will receive the email, knowing that it has to be encrypted. It will then send out a second email telling the person, hey, come to Barracuda, come to Zix and read this encrypted email. I know there's a couple of our customers who are using the Barracuda as a method, and I haven't really heard any main complaints. This is nice for your on-premise Exchange, particularly, or anybody who doesn't support native email encryption when you don't want to have to get into some of the more annoying encryption methods using like client-side encryption. Next, client-side encryption. Client-side encryption is where you, the sender, are actually encrypting the email physically. This is with things such as Zixmail. So Zix, they have the server-side encryption method. They also have a product that you can use to encrypt the email itself, like the actual EML file, and then send that off from your Outlook encrypted so that nobody can sniff that email on the way out. You can send it to another person who's using Zix. They receive it, use their Zix credentials to unencrypt it, and then they can view it that way. If you send it to somebody who's not utilizing Zix, it does the server-side encryption where the email's captured and the Zix server sends it out that way. Couple different ways there. Or if you're not looking for like a third-party vendor, there's SMIME. This utilizes PKI encryption, so you have to give a physical or a virtual certificate to all of your users. Generally, it requires like physical tokens for them to have the certificates and decrypt the mail. But this is true email encryption. Uses certificate-based certificate-based encryption to encrypt the emails. Nobody can read it except for the recipient of the email. Spam filters, anybody who can steal that email can't read it without a corresponding certificate on the back end. Problem is, this is a very difficult system to set up and manage. It requires everybody to be in on it, whereas the previous methods, only the sender needs to have that encryption method set up. The only times I really see it are people who are working with your .mil addresses, DoD, or any of those three-letter agencies out there. They're really the only ones who are using it nowadays. I used it very heavily at like the Department of Veterans Affairs. I know a couple of our customers who are doing direct communication with like Department of Energy or the Air Force are forced to use it, but that's really the only time you're seeing it nowadays. Most places are using some form of server-side encryption or a third-party software like the Zix software to encrypt emails as needed. I do like including this because it is something that people may see if they get into DoD work, but it's not something common enough for most people to worry about. The other big encryption in transit method is your basic SSL TLS encryption. This encryption covers, everything in the real world. For here on an example, I've got like HTTPS written, but things like RDP, SMB, SFTP, really anything, any kind of transfer methods that you see where the letter S suddenly showed up is because it's coming with SSL TLS encryption to encrypt that connection. SSL TLS, it's a kind of a hodgepodge of cryptographic protocols. You'll hear SSL 2.0, 3.0, TLS 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. These are all different cryptographic systems that are used to encrypt the data whenever it's being sent over a network. A lot of administrators may ignore these things, the SSL 2.0, 3.0s and stuff, because they're not familiar with a lot of your SSL settings. It's not something that's super common. And then even inside of those SSL settings, there's those sub algorithms. You may see it on TLS ECH protocols, different pieces like that may need to be turned off or on for compliance purposes are sometimes in there. Luckily, we don't need to know all of those sub algorithms. We mainly just need to know the main big ones, SSL and TLS, the big numbered versions. By default, Windows ships or Linux ships these systems with a lot of the legacy versions enabled nowadays. So you'll see like a new Windows 11 machine will have TLS 1.0, 1.1 enabled, even though it turns off SSL. This is because as newer, stronger ciphers are released, as the newer versions come out, people are slow to update their backend systems with it. So you'll see a lot of web servers that are still using less secure versions of TLS, and some are even still using SSL. You as an admin, though, you should be working to get those old versions off of your network and updated. Microsoft, like actual cloud-hosted softwares, regularly updates to use the newest version of TLS, SSL. Windows supports all of the new versions as soon as possible. Maybe you have to install a registry key or something, but they are usually supported fairly quickly. And so you as an admin want to go through and actually start removing these older versions of SSL and TLS as time goes on. You can manage these versions that are available through things like group policy, Intune, your IIS crypto software, or even just your internet options in Windows if you're doing one-off machines that aren't being managed anywhere. But they need to be managed. They need to have things turned on and off. You as an administrator need to look through your environment and find where some of these lesser protocols are. If you're in an environment that's managed by any kind of large system, your compliance dictates that you turn off the weaker versions like SSL 2 or TLS 1.0. That is a requirement for you, and it's not an easy process. Different applications have different places that they manage these encryption methods or these TLS methods through. Some places you can turn it off on Windows and it turns it off for whatever programs are installed on it. Other places you have to turn it off on both the application that's installed on Windows and turn it off through Windows itself. It's a very large task to do, but it's something that you need to get done. Docs recommends removing everything below TLS 1.2 at this point. It is a process to do it. I said configuring these settings can take a lot of knowledge of your applications. The inheritance is a big thing. You have to kind of work with your vendor support to figure out what it takes to disable these encryption methods. I disabled, I thought that I was cautious. I disabled all of the old versions of TLS on a environment, and I took out a critical application server that wasn't reporting how its encryption was done properly. even with the best of plans, it still is an issue taking it out. This isn't an easy task for some of the larger environments that are out there. But this is something that needs to be done, something recommended. It's something that you need to work through. If you need help, I know Shane with our networking side, he's been working diligently to make sure all of this has been clearing out. Those of you who know like Bennett Thomas or Vadim, they're working through heavily to find different ways and the different requirements for disabling the SSL TLS. It's not something I recommend doing quickly, but it is something I recommend you doing as quick as possible. Especially those of you who are in managed environments that are relying on CMMC protocols, sometimes even HIPAA requires older ciphers to be disabled. Also talking about those older ciphers are being managed on, who manages your systems. I do want to talk about FIPS validated cryptography. This is something that the average business shouldn't be concerned with. Anybody who's in normal manufacturing or law firm, stuff like that, this isn't something that you're going to see, but this is something that anybody who does DoD work needs to fall under. CMMC, your DFARS, all of those require FIPS validated encryption to pass compliance. The Federal Information Processing Standards Validation, or FIPS, is a certification process that ensures that different encryptions meet specific security rules. You can't just have somebody write up an encryption module and then that start getting used by your defense industry. You need to have it actually be verified by FIPS that it is actually secure. So when people create their algorithms, they have to send it off to FIPS. FIPS goes through, runs it through a series of tests, and then sends it off stating this is a validated software. When you as a company have to go through to try and implement your FIPS validation, you may see that everything is validated out there. Different places, they're not going to go through the time and money to pay off to validate their encryption method. What a lot of places will do is they will take a pre-made encryption algorithm, one that has already been FIPS validated, and they will use it in their system for their encryption or whatever. You'll sometimes see this referred to as FIPS compliant encryption, even though FIPS compliant isn't really a real word. But it is something you will sometimes see. When you're pushing for this FIPS validated cryptography requirement, it's not easy to find out if places are using the FIPS validated versions that are encryption. Usually what I have to do is I have to call like a vendor support or something and try to get a hold of their compliance office or officer to get a letter of compliance. And usually what they'll do is they'll have a sheet that says, hey, if you run this program with these 4 settings, then we can say that your encryption's validated. I have one for a remote access tool that says that the encryption's FIPS validated, and it lists the TLS version that has to be turned on, as well as a specific setting in the configuration that has to be done. And so I keep the piece of paper saying that we're FIPS validated, and now if somebody asks, I can show them proof of the compliance officer saying what it takes to be FIPS validated, and then prove to them that those settings have been done. Trying to implement FIPS mode, like I said, this kind of falls under the same issue that like TLS falls under, where you have to figure out where the FIPS mode is implemented. Some places will take FIPS mode through the Windows FIPS mode. Windows FIPS mode is a built-in system. It's turned on through like group policy or a local security policy on the machine, which turns it on. The machine will then only talk in FIPS validated encryption methods. BitLocker will only use FIPS validated methods. Like, it turns off all of your non-validated encryption when possible. Sometimes this can be, sometimes this fails when it's talking to like a Linux box or something. They can't guarantee the FIPS validation there, but it does guarantee that all of your encryption ciphers, and if the person it's talking to supports FIPS, it will only talk in FIPS as well. For Linux, different systems have different ways of managing FIPS mode. Red Hat, there's actually a command line that you run to turn on FIPS mode. Ubuntu, there's a Ubuntu managed FIPS package that you have to install to then enable FIPS mode. There's a couple of different ways there. It's not really a unified standard. And so that one takes a lot of research to figure out exactly how like your different appliances have to be turned on. And then for like different applications, some of them have their own FIPS mode built in. One screenshot I have here is from Veeam. Veeam just has a setting built in that says, check this box and I'm now FIPS validated. This is nice and easy. These are the kind of programs I usually look for to do my FIPS validation with. Other ones, they may piggyback off of Windows being in FIPS mode, but in those situations where I'm not sure because of that, I usually have to reach out to the compliance officer to get proof that turning on the Windows FIPS mode actually turns it on. If you are an organization that needs compliance, don't trust that Windows FIPS mode satisfies you. Actually go through, reach out to your vendor, tell them that you're looking for FIPS validated proof. They all should have a letter that says it. If they don't have a letter, you kind of need to pass on them, because then you cannot tell your auditor, hey, I'm FIPS validated. You can't do that without any kind of proof from the company. And you don't want to take on that liability of you saying, hey, I turned on FIPS mode on Windows, I should be good. And then they do a packet capture and find, non-FIPS validated systems, or they do some kind of pen test and find that. So make sure to get documentation on this if you are doing your applications. But again, most of you aren't going to do this. If you're just a normal law firm or manufacturing company or something, it's actually recommended not to turn on FIPS mode because of issues that can arise. It's definitely something you only turn on when you have to turn it on. Really, that kind of covers it for what I'm looking for with encryption from like a high level overview. I want to take some, I'm going to do some questions, and then I'm going to kind of walk through how like SSL certificates work for those who are interested. But I do, kind of want to just leave with a statement. It's encryption's everywhere. It's not something that anybody's going to ever know every piece of, but as IT administrators, we do need to know rough ideas of how it works. You need to, it's something that you need to know. It's something you need to know of where it is in your environment, what you cannot turn on. You may not be able to BitLock everything. You may have that Windows XP machine that's running the CNC machine that's critical for you. But if you can BitLock 99% of your network, that's saving you from those issues. You may not be able to enforce TLS 1.2 everywhere because there's some application that was written by an engineer who's since retired, and you're in the process of moving away from it. That's okay, so long as you have TLS 1.2 or 1.3 enabled in as many places as you can. It's all about taking small, simple steps to harden the whole environment wherever you can. So for now, Ken?
Oh, so Seth, we do have one question that's come in, and I'll just read you the question. Last I'd been told, neither Zix nor Barracuda's offerings were not CMMC compliant. Has that changed at all?
Correct. Barracuda and Zix do not have a FedRAMP validated version, and that's the big thing that you're looking for any kind of CMC compliance is the term FedRAMP. That verifies that they are using FIPS validated encryption. they follow all the cloud pieces. What I've heard from people who are using a cloud spam filter and doing GCC or doing like an on-premise exchange server or something is Mimecast. Mimecast, I believe, does have a FedRAMP version, and that's what people are using for their on-prem exchange or stuff like that, where they're doing a GCC or not GCC, where they're not doing GCC high, but instead doing a CMC setup.
Okay, thank you, Seth. For a great presentation. As usual, the recording will be available within probably a week. Thank you.